Delta Stewardship Council called to order. Let's see, I saw Mr. Nordhoff around somewhere. All right. Members, we are on file item number 10, which is funding priorities for state investment in Delta levies, one of the mandates given to us by the statute. Ms. Messer, if you would bring up all of your the parties and staff who want to participate in this, please, and then give the council just a general guidance of where you want to go with this discussion.
Okay. Well, we have two other individuals who will join us up here. Dale Newton from the Department of Water Resources, as well as Dan Ray, I believe, will also be joining us. And I did not see him in the hallway, so we'll flag them up here when they come in.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you for having us on the agenda today, this opportunity to update the council on our progress regarding this levy prioritization study. And as you'll notice, this is an action item today, and what we will be asking the council for, I imagine at the end of the presentation, is for a motion to authorize our executive officer, Chris Knopp, to enter into an interagency agreement with the Department of Water Resources.
There's Gail.
Oh, there's Gail. Okay. And then also, just for a point of clarification, attachment number 2 to the staff report is a resolution that the council passed back in May of 2013. And I included it in here just as reference material.
And this is from the Delta plan.
From the Delta
It's
plan.
the language we adopted, right?
It does not contain any new or proposed new language for the motion we'll be asking for today.
So let me just make sure I understand.
Yes.
You're not asking us to adopt once again something that we've adopted 2 times before?
Correct. We are
Okay.
not asking
All right.
for that.
Okay.
I think our ask today might be a little more simple. So, again, I think I want to start off this.
Mr. Ray, you're supposed to sit up in front, too.
Are you joining us? Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so let me see. So before I actually move into giving you the update on where we're at with a couple of different contracting processes, and I'm going to keep those very brief, I did just want to say a couple of things to the council members. First of all, I wanted to assure you, because of requests and that we've received from the council in the past, that while we are very focused on this prioritization study, it is a priority for the staff, for my division. We are hitting this very heavy. We are also being very mindful of all of the other activities and requirements and efforts that are going on out there in terms of reducing flood risk in the Delta for property, for state interests, for people. And so in the staff report, that's why I went ahead and listed the different Delta Plan recommendations and policies, just to kind of build that framework around the fact that in addition to the levy prioritization is one element of this more comprehensive strategic approach to reducing flood risk in the Delta. And myself and my staff and others on the staff at the DSC are tracking other efforts. We're engaging with our partner agencies. We're writing comment letters as we review different documents that come out. And in the staff report, I just pulled together some examples of some recent activities that are occurring. For example, the Delta Protection Commission is beginning work on the feasibility study for their Delta Flood Risk Management Assessment District. The Department of Water Resources, towards the end of September, released their Integrated Flood Management Framework, which is very closely related to and consistent with our policy, RRP1, the table that's in there that lists the interim priorities for state investments in levees, Delta levees. And then the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. They have a series of regional working groups that have been meeting and working on various elements that will move them towards their 2017 update of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And my staff are beginning to engage in those meetings and that process, again, to make sure that we are aligned as we move through this levy prioritization study, that we are staying coordinated and in communication and aligned with these various other efforts as well as the BDCP, which is now, as you know, on the street. So we will be mindful of how we coordinate with that and schedules and actions. So a little bit of a sidestep, just to try and put some context around the fact that, once again, for staff, this is a big priority. I know we're going to talk about the priorities for 2014. That's included in that list. For me, it's way up at the top, right along with hiring additional staff to keep all this moving. So we are very, very much engaged and I just want to say very quickly, thankful, grateful to the Department of Water Resources. They've been very helpful, especially for myself and my staff. And as we move into a bit of discussion about this interagency agreement, you'll kind of see how that all fits together in terms of the funding and their assistance. So, very quick overview. I know. Are there any questions before I?
Well, before we get into the state investment policy recommendations we're supposed to make, I'd like to just get through the procedural stuff on the contract, get the briefing of that, and because of the amount involved, we need a council action to approve that contract. I'd like to get that done as soon as we could.
Okay, great. So yes, so the reason why we need to bring this to the council today is that the delegated authority for our executive officer, Chris Knopp, is limited at $500,000 for any type of contract that we may enter, including amendments and extensions. Given that this interagency agreement has a dollar capacity of $2 million, before we can sign the paperwork, we need the council to authorize Mr. Knopp to sign the paperwork. And once we do that, we move it on. The scope of work is done. Both of our agencies are in agreement. It has one more stop to make, which is the Department of General Services. They approve it, and the money is there for us to move forward with the other part of this process, which I wanted to talk about a little bit today, which is a competitive bid package. So,
how much comes out of the DSC budget?
At this point, I don't have an exact dollar figure, but it's staff time. So my senior engineer will have some time that charges to the DSC
no
budget.
Cash?
No.
All the cash is DWR?
Yes. And what the cash will pay for is to bring a team of consultants on board to help us with the study, some of the DSC staff time.
How large a team?
I don't know yet. We are going to be releasing a competitive bid package.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it seems like a total waste of money and time. I wouldn't say total, nearly total. I mean, I could see the engineers doing work to try to classify the levees on their ability to withstand flood, but I can't see all the rest of the work. And I think with that, we can prioritize. I think it really is. I mean, we know the size of the island. We know the economic output of the island. We know its strategic importance, and all the rest of that. We already know that. What we don't know is the shape of the levees, relatively speaking, compared to the other ones. And I think that I can't believe we're going to spend all that money and take all that time before doing anything for those peripheral studies. That's only one person.
No, I'm with you.
Oh, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I will say there are some elements that we can't do internally, at least in my opinion. Some of the cost to set allocation, analyses that needs to happen. I don't have anybody on staff that can do that. I do need some help with that. We anticipate there'll be some sort of environmental impact assessment that needs to be done. I also need to bring in some horsepower to do that. And these are just
but
looking
those
at...
are all those are all basically judgment calls and not really based on hard facts. I mean, I think the engineers can do an awful lot of analytical work on the condition of the levee, on its ability to withstand various assaults. And I think that's why you need a consultant, not for the soft stuff.
Yeah. If I might, Councilmember Nordoff, we have quite a bit of information that the Department of Water Resources has gathered over the last few years. We've had several reports on it and briefings to the council on the condition of the levees and their efficacy. And we can compare that with storm wave heights and water levels that could be expected in the Delta. Our challenge is evaluating the assets that are on each island and what's the most cost-effective way to provide the kind of protection that folks warrant and to reduce the risk as much as we can. Part of that is about the kinds of levies that would be appropriate. There are not just levies to protect structures, but we also have to think about those places where levies that can work compatibly with environmental restoration projects would make most sense. We have recommendations about places where levies should be set back that we need to build into this sort of evaluation. That's a more complex business than Cindy's staff can do in-house. It's not a back-of-the-envelope sort of activity. People in the Delta are going to be quite interested in how this is done. The amount of testimony that we've had about this in the past indicates that. We tried in the Delta plan to put together a set of recommendations about this, and we're never able to reach agreement with either the council or the representatives of the Delta. So that's why we stepped back to the interim guidelines that we have and said we'll do a more thorough version. And the environmental impact assessment work that needs to be done is all about facts. So most of those facts are probably in hand because of the extensive evaluation that was done for the BDCP, but they have to be assessed in this situation. We need to understand particularly how levels of levee improvement might fit together with other activities. So it's not as simple as just we could put this together on a short-term basis.
Yeah, my recollection is that no one could agree on any single levee being in good shape or in bad shape. Seems like everybody we had in had their own views. The levees are great, we don't have any problems at all, and somebody else comes in, the levees are a disaster. The whole thing is going to turn into a bay without anything. So I think it's really the heart of the issue, condition of the levees. And if I were doing this in a corporate way, if we needed some experts on economic inputs and how to prevent, I would get those experts in. I wouldn't contract with one firm to do everything, because you're not going to get the best when you do that. So I would cherry pick, get the levees stratified in terms of their condition, and then do the rest of it.
And Dave, maybe you would talk a little about the information that you all have gathered over the last few years on levee conditions, if that would be helpful.
I can certainly talk about what we have on hand. The Delta risk management strategy that was done, 5 years ago, did do an analysis of levee segments throughout the Delta, took each island, split it up into 4 to 6 segments, developed the best information that was available based on, 5,000 borings and engineering judgment, materials knowledge, the type of information that would be necessary for anybody to take a look at and determine the stability, fragility of the levees. That's all documented in the DREAMS report. Since that time, the levees have been improved. The Proposition 1E and Proposition 84 have been well used by the local agencies to increase the freeboard, widen out the levee crests, improve the back slopes. So I think we're in pretty good shape as far as the overall Delta is concerned for static loading. Now, the one thing that it does not address and will not address until you get into the foundation and do some very extensive work is seismic loading. So that risk remains. From my own perspective, I like your idea of picking out the best firm to do the economic analysis, the best firm to do the levee studies, and the best firm to develop fragility. And so picking and choosing among various consultants to do the work that they're best at, I think is a good strategy. And I believe that the agreement that you have before you would not limit you in any way, or would not limit the staff in any way from doing that type of an approach. I could address other questions if you have specifics.
Other questions on this issue, which is the contract with DWR? Any questions on that? All right. Well, my suggestion is we deal with that issue first and then get on to the actual policies and procedures in the study. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to discuss this contract? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion? Mr. Johnston moves.
Staff recommendation of contracting authority to the chief operating.
Okay. Is there a second? Second, Mr. Fiorini. Discussion, starting with Mr. Nordhoff.
I like the proviso of putting in not one overall general contractor, but putting in that the experts in the individual areas to be evaluated will be chosen. And if we're not going to do that, I'm going to either abstain or vote negative.
Okay.
Could we get a little clarification on this one? What's that likely to do to our contracting time frame?
Well, I get would mean instead of doing a single request for proposals that would outline the entire scope of work we were seeking, we would have to create several requests for proposals, each targeted at the individual subject matter that we were seeking work. And then it would also put additional, so there'd be 3 contracts, or probably we would need to enter into, or perhaps 4, as opposed to just 1. And then the contract management element of this then too, to make sure the various pieces would work together, would then fall upon Cindy's staff or on Cindy, rather than being able to rely on the prime contractor to do that work. But if that would be the council's, instruction, obviously that would need to comply.
I don't know a lot about contracts, but I'm assuming that if I were to bid on this, and I would in effect go to an engineering firm, go to an economic firm, and partner these people up. So in effect, you're still writing kind of scope of work for each one of these areas, but instead of asking somebody to act as kind of the general contractor, you're in effect saying Cindy's the general contractor, or what? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's an element of it, and in addition, it would be the prime contractor who would be pulling together the subs and expertise and assembling a competitive team.
Dr. Goodwin, who is in fact an engineer and knows about these things. Dr. Goodwin.
Actually, I really appreciate the comments that Councilman Nordhoff mentioned, and I think there's probably a couple of things there that, if you look at the rollout of some of the healthcare things just recently, part of the reason for that failing was that nobody had ultimate responsibility. So something was developed in parts, but when it came together, there was inadequate coordination. So perhaps as a compromise in this, I really like the idea of having a proposal where team members are very clearly articulated. So you want the national experts. This is going to be highly potential for high challenge, to have the best people on the teams in a competitive environment, and then making sure that those individuals that are named in the contract are actually part of the project. And there's no substitutions without the approval of your staff. So that would be my suggestion. And then you're sure that everything's coming together. You're under one highly coordinated product.
I mean, it's been my experience that a lot of suppliers will offer one-stop shopping. We'll do everything with our existing staff, and only if absolutely necessary will they go outside and supplement it with a third party. So I like this idea, and I like individual responsibility, and I like putting the responsibility on us and on our staff rather than signing it up and say, go away and do it. Those things rarely work out. They usually take longer and run over budget in terms of cost, in my experience.
Okay, I am.
Well,
Council's
we've got a
pleasure.
motion.
That's why you get paid those big bucks.
Okay,
That's right.
well, we've got a motion. Hank, I know you've made that statement. Do you want to make would you want to see the amendment, the motion amended
Yes.
to say specifically?
That staff will make every effort to ensure that the different areas of the investigation evaluation are undertaken by the experts, the leading experts in the field.
Okay.
You'd want to do that anyway, wouldn't you?
And I think we were going down that pathway. I think we will reevaluate the mechanism, but yes.
Second.
That's an amendment. Mr. Johnson, what do you think? Just one question. We were planning on going out to bid in January. What would be the effect of the amendment on the timeline?
I don't know. Should I jump in here?
Yeah.
It will cost us a few weeks. I think we have, maybe I'm being naive, but we have the scope of work fleshed out, and that's a large part of what we've been doing, and it's taken us a while to get to this point. Now, and I was going to jump into the competitive bid package that my staff have been working on. We have something developed, but it's called a request for proposals, and the way it is set up is you would have a lead firm that would pull a team of experts together, whether inside, whether outside, but each one of the tasks has a very detailed, here's what we want, with flexibility in terms of how to get from point A to point B. So it's all as one package now, and we're ready to finalize it. We're doing some internal review. We were going to hit the streets with that in early January. So to piece that out and then have to develop.
I would feel uncomfortable if one firm were to get it and then they were going to make the decision on who the experts are without our involvement. I emphasize again the most important part, the conditions of the levies. That's number one. And the rest of it follows from there.
And to respond to the proposal, each competing team will need to identify the various members. We think about on the Delta plan itself, we had a prime contractor, but then they brought in folks with expertise on communications, on land use planning, on mapping and other graphic skills, and all those were identified. They need to be identified in the subcontract. So we'll certainly, in the proposal, we'll certainly know who the members of the team are, and the quality of the team is going to be a primary consideration in awarding.
But you've got to have the right to veto those selections. In other words, I don't want the general contractor or the head of the firm making those decisions.
Right.
You should make those decisions.
Are you suggesting
Or
that,
at least bless them.
And part of this process, this request for proposals, there's three phases. So first we're going to get a proposal in, and they'll tell us how they're going to approach dealing with each of the tasks. They're going to provide us with resumes and CVs of all of the staff, whether they're in their firm or whether they're going to sub out. We have a selection panel that will take a look at that and rank it. So we have a whole scoring system in there that allows us to say, this is working, or no, we think maybe you're a little weak in this area. We'll have an interview portion of this overall process where they bring the team in. We get to hear the presentation. We get to drill them in terms of their background, how they're going to approach things, and then the final step is the cost. But that is, our goal was not to necessarily go with lowest bidder. We're trying to go with the most qualified team that we can bring together, and that's what will drive the selection process.
Cindy, it sounds like we're sliding back to where we were before, that you're going to have to object and fight once the general, if we will, once the head of the firm takes his team together. You're going to have to agree with it, or you're going to have a tough time finding somebody else. That's not the situation I want you to be in.
Well, if that was the case, then, because there are limitations in our ability as a state agency to, in terms of what our authorities, in terms of reviewing proposals, and our ability to take half of this proposal and half of this proposal and mash them up in a separate action. So if that's the direction the council wants us to absolutely take, then we'll have to consider how we structure the RFP to meet that need.
I think that's true.
If that's the council's insistence, then we may end up having to do several proposals.
Yeah, it would be split up.
Yeah, get it done right. It takes another week or two.
So the answer on the time delay is there might be some, but we're not sure how much.
I think that's correct.
Okay. All right. Mr. Johnston, what's your, as the maker of the motion?
As long as somebody could explain it to me, I'm willing to.
At the risk of putting that claim to the test.
Maybe Chris could sum up.
Well, I think what we settled on is that we wanted the very best people for each subject area of this proposal. We wanted to select those people and have approval authority for them and ensure that they are the ones, in fact, doing the job. So we will have to restructure the bidding so that we can accomplish that with our contracting. So I think the motion is basically that we separate this into subject areas with the proviso that we are achieving the highest caliber individuals we can for each subject area, and that's at our discretion, not at a contractor's.
Well said.
Mr. Moraz, Ms. Newton, do you have any observations on this, given your years of experience in dealing with policymakers' intervention in contract details?
Contracting is not quick in the state system. I think that what Mr. Goodwin said, Dr. Goodwin said, with regard to what happened to Obamacare is something to take note of. We have done contracting in the manner that you suggest, where we have tried to have each of the individual experts, but it has to come out as a cohesive product. And so you either have a general with all their subs, or Cindy's staff needs to function as that general. And so by taking this action, you have put another workload on Cindy's staff, and that's fine with me. We'll support her however we can.
You'll be getting lots of phone calls.
Our only concern is at the end of the day that we all concur and that this is a really good product we can all work with. So I think either way you do it, it'll work out. We do a lot of contracting, and 3 separate contracts will be more work for your staff.
Is it possible, though, to organize it into the engineering aspects and then the economic aspects, and then possibly the political? So rather than 6 or 7, you have 2?
I think that you would end up with 4 pieces. You'd have an engineering piece, you'd have the economic piece, you would have the communications piece, and then you'd have the environmental assessment, CEQA compliance.
That sounds manageable to me. But I'm not doing it.
Well, to further compound, I'd feel more comfortable with direction to staff to attempt to consider including in a master contract language which gives us the approval right, not the veto right, but the approval right, as opposed to mandating 4 contracts with different subject areas now with us doing the division. Because it just seems to me that it might be easier to sell the right to approve in a master contract the hiring of subs in specialty areas than it is to mandate the construction of 4 different bids in subject areas. But this is not an area where I have enough experience to be comfortable with that, but that's my thought.
If I can chime in again, we've written actually it was a different employer. I had at that time a different state agency, but you can write into the contract language that you have approval over any change in the personnel in their proposal. So if anyone tries to switch out somebody, you can write that whether it's the general construct or whether it's individual. You write that into your contract language.
And I assume we're also writing in the contract identified areas of great importance where skill and talent must be available in meeting the bid and all that, and you could beef up that language. I mean, Hank, I'm not sure that goes in the direction you want, but
It's a little bit weak, Phil, to be honest with it. An approval right, it sounds to me like a veto right.
It is.
And that's more of a negative than a positive.
You can keep vetoing till you get who you want. That I've done that before as a state agency where someone's brought in a substitute and said no.
Yeah.
I will not accept that.
I would say, all the components would have to be approved before they're included in the contract. Not that it can be vetoed, but I mean, the idea is that you would work with the contractor when the selections are being made. That's, to me, it's upfront as opposed to back-ended.
If I can chime in here just a little bit, I believe what you're alluding to here is going to be a series of non-competitive bid contracts, because you're wanting to specify which particular individuals can do what type of work, and you're not opening it up to the general bidding public. Those are an absolute nightmare, and I think you can take a look and expect your contract still to be where it is today at the time of next year. They just don't happen in state service.
Well, we had the four that Dan mentioned, the engineering, the economic, the communications, and then the environmental.
Yes, I think where you write a general scope of work that specifies the type of activities you want a consultant to take, and you put that out for bid, I think you'll be okay. You can do that. But when you exercise the right to pick and choose who it is that's actually going to perform that work, that's when you get into the non-competitive bid portion, and that's the portion that you want to avoid, at least in state contracting.
Mr.
From a
Fielder?
timing standpoint as opposed to a quality standpoint.
We just did a non-competitive bid on one of my other programs, and they can go quickly if you have the justification, but I don't know how you could get an appropriate justification with consultants. We can do it if we could say there's nobody else that can do this project, and I don't know how you're going to be able to say that with expertise when you're talking about people's individual expertise. So I don't think you would be able to do actually non-competitive bid justification under the state service.
So the way this would work out, it would be putting out a bid for everything. One firm gets it,
No, you don't have to do that.
and
No,
then you could work with that firm to make sure that the best people are in fact devoted to the project.
Well, the
bid.
approach would be that the firms that are responding to the proposal will identify their team. They'll need to say, this is who's going to be the economics people, not just this firm, but these individuals are the principals involved. This is
With
the firm, this is the
resumes
group that'll be
and
doing the environmental work, and these are the principals. We may not know every draftsman or a clerk that's working on it, but we know who the principals are. And substitutions can't be made without the permission of the agency that's in it, with whom, that, you know, are us, who has being the folks who've entered into the agreement.
I don't know the field well enough to say, whether everybody's equal or some are really stand out. But again, when you're making those value judgments, I would say the engineering is probably the most important. More important than communications.
I think the strength of this proposal of going out to bid and asking for the best expertise under each section is we do get a broad cross-section. The companies know that they're competing against the expertise that they have to present. So you do end up with a lot of horse trading of expertise to make sure that, if you're company A, that you've got the best team. So I think you're going to end up with a high-quality team going at it this way. And I like the idea of having approval of individual team members and going back to bidders and saying, you've got a strong team for 3 of the 4, but we want someone else on item 4. And I think we can get to your concern if we can approach it that way and keep it manageable at the same time.
Might I suggest a way to ensure that that we've also done before is you could have your proposals as a two-step process, and the first step would be more of a conceptual where they put forward their teams, and at that point you could say about the team they put together, your strengths are here, your weaknesses are here, and then they would have another bite at the apple to come back with a better team. So you have the ability to do a two-step process, call it a concept versus a full proposal. That might be one way to address your issue.
I mean, it sounds, given the bureaucratic morasses that we are sometimes involved in state government and federal government, that's probably the best way to do it. But again, what I'm trying to avoid is, hey, here, you do it. And we got to get involved, we got to get engaged.
Right.
And at the very beginning is just really important. And if we can have language in there, as we've talked about, to protect us and to provide that right to us with the veto power, whatever you're going to call it, I think it'd be okay.
Okay. And I think we can craft that. And
Mr. Risto.
Who's on the selection committee? Who will be on this RFP selection committee?
right now it would be my...
Because I think that goes to what Mr. Nordhoff's talking about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So right now, as it stands, it would be myself, our principal engineer, when that person comes on board, if I can get him on board in time. I don't want to stall this for that. I imagine Mr. Ray will be part of that. I know I've talked to Dave and Len Marino at the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. They're looking into whether they can actually sign any documents, but they will definitely serve as advisory, helping us in the selection process. We've talked to Dr. Goodwin to also be part of that. I'm trying to think if I've forgotten anybody else.
We've also talked about extending an invitation to the staff of the Protection Commission, obviously, because this study needs to be done in coordination with your own evaluation of the levy assessment district. We want to make sure that they're comfortable with how we're proceeding with this.
I just think that who's on the selection committee is going to be the one who calls the shot on who eventually makes up this group.
Right, and we think it's a good team. I think between all of us, we cover the engineering aspects, the experience through Dave and Len, Marino with the dreams, with the data that's available. Dr. Goodwin has been helping us greatly with the peer review process, with the levies, the engineering information. Dan and I are taking a really good look at, call it the communications, but we've built in a pretty heavy item in terms of outreach and facilitation, because we want this to be an open process as we move through the study and engaging the different stakeholders. And then Dan especially comes with a lot of good background, and I know others as well, on the environmental impact assessment side of it. So doesn't mean it's closed to that group, but that's who we have right now.
Yeah, Cindy, if I could just add to that, and of course the selection criteria will be very, very clear to the bidders.
Yes.
It'll be laid out in fine detail to try and minimize that, your personalities in the selection process. So.
Yeah. And the best selection criteria is someone who's done it before and done it very successfully. Successfully means they got the right answer in a relatively short period of time at the right price.
Right, exactly. And we have that built in as well, including references that we will get from the team. So.
All right, I think we beat this to death.
Well, do you want to move with the language you originally had? I was about to suggest that if we get an authorization, the minutes of this meeting should reflect the general statements Mr. Knopp's made on how the conduct would be conducted, and the notion that the composition of the, what do they call it, the interview committee, screening committee, whatever the nomenclature is, will include the named individuals or entities or comparable, because you have to assume there'll be schedule problems for somebody, but if you name individuals. So people of that level of expertise and talent, that range of talent. And Hank, that wouldn't then require an elaborate motion, but the minutes could reflect that addition. Randy, what do you think? That's fine. Would that...
And the individuals will be not just on the selection committee, but on the people doing the work. I mean, it's like a law firm. You don't hire a law firm. You hire a lawyer within that law firm. And they can't have the name of the law firm. They got to have lawyers.
Right.
Are we okay on that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if that's all reflected, I'm good with that.
Okay, Larry. Okay. My suggestion is so with the understanding that if the motion is adopted, it's also instructions to staff, in this case Mr. Knopp and Ms. Messer, to summarize this discussion. The summary will be reflected in the minutes of the meeting, which is the council understanding. We'll check that next month to be sure. Is that understood? Any questions about that, Chris?
Nope.
Cindy?
Nope, I'm good.
Dan? Okay. Thank you for your sanguine view of state contracting process, Ms. Newton. Sanguine and practical, but very well taken. Okay, starting with Mr. Nordhoff on the motion.
Aye.
Johnston.
Rooster, aye.
Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye. Okay, you got 5-0 on that. All right, now, let's continue this discussion, and I don't know whether you guys want to stay for this continuation part of any further amplification. I know this was the only action part.
Right.
One thing I wanted to ask is, when do you want to do the equivalent of kind of a more detailed briefing, not just a status report on the contract and the bidding and all that, but just how you're going to approach it? You've heard me say enough times, I think the state investment strategy, which is a recommendation to the legislature, the most important and the most difficult questions are the ones that occur first, not the ones that follow all the detailed information on the condition of an individual levy. And the starting point for this is, should the state of California financially assume responsibility for all levies, or should they not? And I understand DWR's point of view, but other than the skepticism about assuming full financial responsibility, the clarity after that is missing, and that's part of, it seems to me, of what you have to do. I went back and read the policies and recommendations in Chapter 7, not just the two that relate to levy review, but all of the emergency response, flood control, risk reduction, because that's the policy. And I think we've got a reasonably good starting point, albeit controversial in some areas, a reasonably good starting point on the policy statement the legislature might understand. Once we clarify that, and that's really our staff's business with the council, then the other stuff becomes more, I think, becomes more clear. I may be wrong. So what do you want to do on a review, Ms. Bishop?
I didn't have really a game plan today for this. I was just going to take it through just a brief review, which I've run through quickly.
How about a status update on contract development, implementation, all the folderol that goes through in the contracting stuff next month, and at least project, what's the next stage, a council work plan for the activity from that point on. We've got some skeleton things we've looked at before that relate to it, but
just at the broad framework, in our discussion of the 2014 priorities, we've outlined several steps we intend to take over the coming months. You did a great white paper prior to Cindy and my arrival.
Oh, that was the one that the consultants had done on...
as background for the Delta Plan itself. Now,
right.
Several things have changed and that need to be updated in that since it was drafted. One of the things that's most noteworthy, I think, for many of us that work in the area of levees and flood management is the changing commitment or lack thereof of federal agencies to assist in responding to a disaster should levees be damaged, and the changes in the National Flood Insurance Program, too. So from that point of view, risks to the state's liability for deltas, perhaps, and certainly to the public in terms of damages have changed. We want to update that. We've been trying to schedule a meeting with our federal partners to bring that information to the council. An additional step we would hope to take probably later this summer then would be to bring together an issue paper much like the one that Councilmember Fiorini drafted on storage that again would outline probably as an update to the white paper the issues that confront us and lay out, as you've identified, Chairman Eisenberg, the overall framework for Delta risk management that's identified in the Delta Plan and into which then this priority study would fit.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's get a status report in January. Given the tight time frame for all of this, I think you just ought to assume monthly status reports all through the year because we've got to make our recommendations as rapidly as possible and no later than January 1st, 2015. So we need to start to work and keep a very high level of attention on this. So.
Okay.
Ms. Newton, Mr. Morales, thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. Members, thank you for this discussion. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Members, if you would look now to file